Being poor in 1300 was actually better than being middle class. Today, you check your phone before your feet hit the floor. Your alarm went off at 6:47. You have 23 unread emails, a commute that takes 54 minutes each way, and a job that follows you home every single night through a glowing rectangle in your pocket. You are exhausted, stressed, stretched thin. And here is the strange part. By almost every material measure, you are richer than 99.9% of every human being who ever lived. You have heating, running water, more food than you can eat. But something still feels wrong. That feeling has a history. And that history goes back exactly to the moment humans decided to get civilized. In 1300, a poor peasant in rural England owned almost nothing. No house, no savings, no career, no retirement plan. By today's standards, they were destitute. But here is what nobody tells you. That peasant worked fewer hours than you do. Anthropologist Marshall Solins called hunter-gatherer and early agrarian societies the original affluent societies. Not because they had more things, but because they needed less, worked less, and rested more. His landmark 1966 study found that subsistence-level people in pre-industrial societies worked as few as 3 to 5 hours per day to meet all their survival needs. 3 to 5 hours. What do you work? In medieval England, the average agricultural laborer worked roughly 150 days per year, according to economist Juliet Shore, who documented this in her book, The Overworked American. Feast days, saints' days, and seasonal rhythms meant that somewhere between a third and a half of the entire year was considered rest time. Not vacation you had to request, not PTO you had to earn, just time, built into the structure of life itself. Compare that to the average American today who works more hours annually than workers in any other developed nation, including Japan. More hours than medieval serfs. Let that land. Now you might be thinking, yes, but they died at 35. That is one of the most repeated myths in all of popular history, and it is almost entirely wrong. The low average life expectancy in medieval times was driven almost entirely by child mortality. If you survived past age 5, your odds of reaching your 60s were actually not that different from today in relative terms. Historian David Herlihy, whose research on medieval demographics reshaped how scholars understand pre-modern life, found that adults who made it through childhood in the 13th and 14th centuries could reasonably expect to live into their late 50s and 60s, not 80, but not 35 either. The number you have heard your whole life was a statistical trick, and their food, while simple, was not the starvation diet you might imagine. In non-famine years, a medieval English peasant ate roughly 3,500 calories a day, according to historian Christopher Dyer, who spent decades reconstructing the actual diets of ordinary medieval people. That is more than most nutritionists recommend for a moderately active adult today. They ate bread, legumes, ale, seasonal vegetables, and more meat than the Victorian poor who came centuries later. The truly terrible period for ordinary people was not the Middle Ages. It was the Industrial Revolution. That is the era that gave us 16-hour days, child labor, urban disease, and genuine mass starvation in the middle of wealthy cities. The Middle Ages look almost humane by comparison, but here is where it gets truly strange. The medieval poor had something you do not have. Community. Real, daily, unavoidable community. Your life in 2024 is structurally isolated in a way no human being in history ever experienced before. You live on average 18 miles from your closest family member. You may go entire days without a real face-to-face conversation. You eat alone more than any previous generation on record. Psychologist Robert Putnam tracked the collapse of community life in America across decades, and his findings, published in his book Bowling Alone, showed a near-total erosion of the social structures that once tied people together. Clubs, churches, neighborhood gatherings, union halls, all of it quietly hollowed out. The medieval peasant lived in a village of maybe 150 people. They knew every face, every name, every story. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar found that 150 is actually the cognitive limit of stable human social relationships, which is why that number appears again and again across human history in villages, military units, and early company structures. The medieval poor were living inside the exact social structure human brains evolved to function in. You are not. You are living in a city of millions and struggling to maintain 6 real friendships. You have 847 followers and nobody to call at 2 a.m. And your brain registers that gap not as a minor inconvenience. It registers it as a threat to survival. Because loneliness, as neuroscientist John Cacioppo spent his career documenting, activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Your body treats social isolation like starvation, like being hunted, and you feel it every day without knowing why. Now add debt. The medieval peasant had no mortgage, no student loans, No credit card balance rolling over at 24% interest. They paid rent, often in grain or labor, and that was the end of it. They had no financial past following them around, no credit score determining their worth, no subscription they forgot to cancel quietly draining their account. You, right now, are almost certainly in debt to an institution that did not exist 200 years ago. The average American carries over $96,000 in personal debt. And unlike the medieval peasant whose bad harvest ended when spring came, your debt does not reset with the seasons. It compounds, it follows you, it shows up in your sleep. This is not an argument for going back. Nobody is suggesting you trade antibiotics for feudalism. Modern medicine alone is worth the entire trade. And for women, for minorities, for anyone outside the narrow band of people medieval society protected, the past was not romantic. It was brutal in ways that numbers cannot capture. But here is the question worth sitting with. If material wealth was supposed to make us happy, why did it stop working somewhere around 1970? Economist Richard Easterlin identified what is now called the Easterlin paradox. Beyond a certain income threshold, more money does not produce more happiness. Countries that doubled their GDP across decades showed almost no improvement in reported well-being. We got richer. We did not get better. The medieval peasant was not happy because they were poor. They were not. Poverty, disease, and feudal hierarchy were genuinely terrible. But they had three things that turned out to matter more than anyone expected: time, community, meaning. Their work had a beginning and an end. They could see what they built with their hands. They belonged to something larger than themselves, whether that was a village, a faith, a seasonal rhythm, or all three. And when the day was done, it was done. The Lord did not send them a message at 9 p.m. The harvest did not follow them to bed. You have more than any human in history. More comfort, more safety, more options. And you are still checking your phone before your feet hit the floor. Not because you are ungrateful, because the system you are living in was not designed around human needs. It was designed around economic output. And those two things, it turns out, are not the same. The peasant in 1300 knew when the day was over. Do you? If this changed the way you think about money, there's someone else in history who will change it again. Subscribe. I'll find them for you.